Earl Persing died alone in April 2020, separated from his family by a pane of glass and a pandemic that made touching the dying a luxury no one could afford. His daughter posted about it on the Forest Service memorial page, how he'd spent 40 years walking through wilderness that would kill most people within 72 hours, only to die in a care home in Bozeman, drowning in his own lungs while his children watched from outside like visitors at an aquarium. I read about it on my phone in a motel room in West Yellowstone the night before I went back into the field for the first time that spring. The room reeked of bleach applied with the desperate conviction of someone trying to sterilize away invisible death. The heater knocked against the wall in an arrhythmic pattern that made sleep feel like something that happened to other people. I lay there in the chemical smell and the darkness, thinking about Earl and about the thing he'd told me 6 years earlier that I'd dismissed as folklore. If the animals ever go silent, you have 10 minutes. He'd said it in 2014, my first season with the Forest Service, during a routine equipment check in the thoroughfare, 25 miles from the nearest road. We'd been talking about his wife's lemon bars, how she grew Meyer lemons in their sunroom through Montana winters, how the tartness cut through the sweetness in a way that made you understand why people wrote poems about simple things. Then, with no transition, no change in tone, he'd said it. "Oh, by the way, if the animals ever go silent, you have 10 minutes. I'd waited for him to elaborate. Earl was unwrapping a lemon bar, his thick fingers careful with the wax paper, nails cracked and yellowed from 4 decades of outdoor work. A Steller's jay was harassing us from a nearby lodgepole pine, making those harsh, ascending calls that sound like rusty hinges. The air was warm on my face. Everything was ordinary. 10 minutes to do what? I'd asked. To leave. He bit into the lemon bar and chewed slowly, watching the jay. A flake of powdered sugar clung to his gray mustache. Not 10 minutes until something happens. 10 minutes to get clear. That's the window. After that, the odds aren't good. I'd laughed. I was 26 with a master's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. I understood perfectly well that no natural phenomenon could cause all ambient animal activity to cease simultaneously. Predator presence might suppress prey behavior in localized areas, but birds would still call, insects would still move, the soundscape would shift, not stop. I explained this to Earl in approximately those words. He nodded as though I'd confirmed something. That's right, it shouldn't happen, but when it does, you have to leave. He finished his lemon bar, folded the wax paper into a small square and put it in his pocket, the same pocket where he kept his reading glasses and a notebook he never seemed to write in. The jay made another call and flew to a different tree. Earl stood, brushed crumbs from his olive drab trousers, and went back to work. He never mentioned it again in the 2 years before he retired. I thought about it occasionally, the way you think about half-heard jokes or stories without endings. I brought it up once to Claire Newell, another biologist who'd worked with Earl in the 80s. We were at a conference in Missoula, sharing a table at a restaurant crowded with other wildlife professionals. I mentioned the rule as an amusing anecdote, a piece of old-timer folklore. Claire was raising her glass when I said it. She stopped, the glass suspended halfway to her mouth, and looked at me for a long moment. "Earl told you that." "He did. What does it mean?" She set the glass down without drinking and gave a single slow nod. Then she asked me how I was finding the conference and whether I'd tried the huckleberry pie. I'd assumed it was hazing, some backwoods mysticism designed to test gullibility, that Claire had been embarrassed on Earl's behalf for perpetuating it. That April, with Earl newly dead and the world emptied out by the virus, I drove into the Gallatin National Forest to service the first monitoring station of the season. The roads were deserted. I passed through Bozeman without stopping, streets nearly empty, a few masked figures hurrying along sidewalks like they were fleeing something invisible. The forest entrance station was unmanned, the residence dark, its windows reflecting the overcast sky with the dead gleam of eyes that have stopped seeing. The parking area at the trailhead was empty, except for a white Toyota Tacoma with government plates. It belonged to Marcus Weber, a technician who'd started a few months before the pandemic. He was supposed to be working a different sector, but coverage was thin that spring. I figured he'd swapped assignments. The trail climbed through lodgepole forest, trees thin and close-spaced, their bark the color of dried blood. Patches of old snow lingered in shadows. The ground was soft with snowmelt and last year's needles, each footstep leaving a clear print that filled slowly with brown water. The monitoring station sat in a drainage at 7,000 feet, a 2-hour hike from the trailhead. I'd done this dozens of times. The work was routine. Download data, check batteries, clean the solar panels of pine pollen. Work that had to continue regardless of what was happening in the human world, because grizzlies and wolves and elk didn't know there was a pandemic. I reached the drainage around noon. The monitoring station was mounted on a steel post at the edge of a meadow, perhaps 200 yards across, bordered by forest on 3 sides and talus slope on the 4th. A stream ran through it, swollen with snowmelt, the water still cold enough to make my teeth ache when I filled my bottle. A red-tailed hawk was circling overhead, riding a thermal. Ground squirrels chirped from burrows near the tree line. The stream made its constant low sound, snow-cold water over rocks. I'd been working for about 30 minutes, crouched beside the monitoring station with my laptop balanced on my knee, when the silence came. It didn't taper. The ground squirrels didn't gradually stop chirping. The hawk didn't drift out of sight. The ambient insect hum didn't slowly decrease. One moment, the drainage was alive with sound, layered and complex and constant, as it had been for the entire 2-hour hike. The next moment, it was not. The quiet was so sudden and so total that for a disoriented instant, I thought I'd gone deaf. I touched my ears, pressing my palms against them, then pulling them away, listening for the pressure change. I heard my own breathing, harsh in the stillness, the rustle of my jacket as I moved. My hearing was intact. The silence was external, real. I went perfectly still. The stream still made its sound, water over rocks, because water is not an animal and doesn't respond to whatever animals respond to. But there was nothing else. The hawk had vanished from the sky. The meadow looked identical to how it had looked 5 seconds ago. Same grass, same trees, same gray rocks. But it was different now. Emptied. Like a theater after everyone has left and you're standing on the stage alone speaking lines to rows of empty seats. I looked at my watch. 12:47. I packed my equipment. I did it efficiently, but without rushing, one part of my mind insisting there would be an explanation, some phenomenon I hadn't learned about in graduate school, some atmospheric condition, some subsonic disturbance that scattered wildlife. Animals were sensitive to things humans couldn't perceive. Seismic activity, changes in barometric pressure, electromagnetic fields. Another part of my mind was remembering the way Claire Newell had looked at me when I mentioned Earl's rule. The glass suspended in midair, her slow nod, the quick change of subject. I got my pack on my shoulders and started back toward the trailhead. The hike out usually took 2 hours. I moved faster, walking at the upper edge of sustainable pace, trying not to acknowledge to myself that I was hurrying. The forest was utterly still. No movement in the underbrush, no birdsong from the canopy. The lodgepoles stood in their rows like columns in an abandoned church, the space between them dim and brown and motionless. I've been in wilderness areas my entire adult life. I've never experienced anything like that quality of silence. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't serene. It was the silence of a held breath, of a room where someone is hiding. I was perhaps 40 minutes from the trailhead, still on the south-facing traverse where snowmelt made the trail slick, when I looked to my left and saw the shape among the trees. It was uphill from the trail, maybe 60 feet away, visible in a gap between 2 lodgepole pines. At first, I took it for a hiker. The proportions were right, bipedal, 5'10" or maybe 6 feet, in the posture of someone watching something in the distance. I nearly called out. My hand was rising to wave, a greeting forming in my throat, when I noticed the surface, The figure appeared to be facing away from me, or I think it was because I couldn't make out features. It appeared to be wearing dark clothing, or was dark-skinned, or was covered in some dark material that was neither cloth nor flesh. But the color wasn't uniform. It shifted and rippled the way water ripples when something moves beneath the surface. The overall shape was perfectly still, not a twitch, not a sway, nothing that indicated breathing or balance adjustment. Yet the surface crawled and pulsed with slow movement, as though the outer layer was independent of what lay underneath. My legs stopped walking, made the decision without consulting me, as if they understood I was about to step off the edge of a cliff. I watched the shape. The shape did not move, but its surface continued to ripple and shift in patterns that suggested something beneath was adjusting itself, repositioning, like someone trying on a suit that doesn't quite fit. Then it turned its head. I say head because that's the word for the top part of a body, but what turned toward me had no face. There were indentations where eyes might be, shallow depressions in the dark surface that oriented toward me like camera lenses swiveling to track movement, a slight protrusion where a nose might be, a ridge that could have been a brow, the faint suggestion of a jaw, but no features, no expression. Nothing but that rippling dark surface like bubbling oil reflecting no light. It turned its head, and the indentations oriented toward me, and I understood it was looking at me. Understood it had known I was there all along, had been waiting for me to notice it. Every instinct screamed to run, but I'd read enough about predator-prey dynamics to know that running triggers pursuit. Fleeing is the signal that activates the chase instinct. I turned away from it slowly, keeping my movements unhurried, and continued walking down the trail at the same pace. Inside, my heart was slamming against my ribs hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. My hands shook. I gripped the straps of my pack and listened for footsteps behind me, for the crack of a branch, any sound of pursuit. I heard nothing. The silence continued, thick and absolute, broken only by my footfalls and my ragged breathing. I reached the trailhead around 2:30. The white Tacoma was still there, parked beside my vehicle, its windshield dusty with pollen. I got into my truck, locked the doors, and sat there watching the trailhead. Nothing emerged from the trees. After 5 minutes, I started the engine and drove back to the motel, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds until I was back on pavement. Marcus Weber was reported missing 4 days later. His truck was found at the trailhead where I'd seen it, driver's door hanging open, his pack still in the bed. Search and rescue went out on day 6, delayed by pandemic bureaucracy, risk assessments, PPE requirements, social distancing protocols for search teams. They found him on day 8, in a drainage 3 miles from where I'd been working, on the opposite side of the ridge. I wasn't on the search team, but I saw the incident report because it came through my department as routine. Official cause of death: animal attack, probably grizzly. The report noted the body had been partially consumed, that remains were scattered over a considerable area, consistent with bear behavior. Grizzlies often cache kills and return to feed over several days. It also noted, in the clinical language of such documents, that certain aspects of the scene were inconsistent with typical bear predation. The pattern of tissue damage didn't match known grizzly feeding behavior. The position of remains suggested deliberate placement rather than scattering. Some parts of the body were missing entirely, including the face. I read that report twice, looked at the photographs, which I shouldn't have done, and which I can never stop seeing when I close my eyes. That night, I dreamt of the shape in the forest, the featureless head turning toward me, the surface rippling with slow internal movement. In the dream, it opened its mouth, a horizontal slit that widened until it split the head nearly in half. Marcus Weber's voice came out of it, muffled and wet, saying my name, asking me to wait, telling me he needed help, asking why I'd left him there alone. I woke at 3 a.m., sheets soaked with sweat, and didn't go back to sleep. 6 weeks later, in early June, I was assigned a multi-day backcountry survey in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. 2 nights of camping at remote sites to service equipment too far from any trailhead to reach in a single day. Normally, this kind of assignment was done in pairs, but half our staff had been furloughed or quit, and we were operating on a skeleton crew. I was going alone. I considered refusing, could claim illness, fabricate a family emergency, simply refuse and accept the consequences. But the consequences would include loss of health insurance during a pandemic that was killing people my age, loss of income in an economy that had shed 30 million jobs in 2 months, loss of the only career I'd ever wanted. And there was another consideration I didn't want to examine too closely. If I refused, someone else would be assigned, someone who didn't know about the rule, someone who would hike into that wilderness without the 10-minute warning that might be the only thing that saved them. I packed my tent and sleeping bag and bear spray and drove to the trailhead. The first day was uneventful. I hiked 9 miles to the first campsite, a flat area near a creek at 8,000 feet. The weather was clear and warm. I set up my tent, filtered water, ate freeze-dried dinner that tasted like salt and chemicals. I hung my food bag from a tree branch high enough to discourage bears. The soundscape was ordinary. Clark's nutcrackers called from white bark pines in their harsh, rattling voices. Pikas chirped in the talus slopes. The creek made its water sounds. I slept poorly, waking often to listen to sounds outside my tent. By morning, I'd nearly convinced myself that what I'd seen in April had been stress, isolation, my mind manufacturing threats where none existed. Then, I remembered the photographs of Marcus Weber's body. The second day, I serviced 2 monitoring stations and hiked another 7 miles to the second campsite in a high basin near treeline. The basin was perhaps 300 yards across, a natural amphitheater of rock and alpine tundra with clusters of stunted subalpine fir at the lower end, their branches shaped by decades of wind into flags pointing east. A small lake occupied the center of the basin, water black and still, reflecting the peaks that ringed it. My campsite was at the edge of the fir cluster. I set up my tent, ate dinner, watched the light drain from the sky. Shadows deepened from purple to black. Stars appeared one by one. I was in my sleeping bag by 9. I woke at 2:14 a.m. I'd developed a habit of checking the time immediately upon waking, a reflex I couldn't break. I lay still in my sleeping bag, listening. Something was outside my tent. Not footsteps, not the sounds of an animal moving through brush, not sniffing at tent fabric or investigating a potential food source. These were wet sounds, organic sounds. They reminded me of surgery, of procedures I'd only seen in videos, sounds of things that should be inside a body being touched, handled, manipulated. I heard what might have been skin tearing, a long, slow rip like fabric being pulled apart along a seam, fibers separating one by one. I heard cartilage popping, the sound a knuckle makes when you crack it, but deeper, larger, coming in sequences of 3 or 4. I heard bones creaking under tension, something like the sound a tree makes when it falls, a structure being pushed past its limits. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Lay there listening to these sounds, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. A bear with an injury, a deer with a broken leg. The rationalizations came one after another. None fit the sounds I was hearing. The sounds continued for perhaps 10 minutes. Then they stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. Movement, closer now. A soft impact, like a hand being placed flat against tent fabric. The mesh panel at the front of my tent looked out onto the basin. There was enough moonlight to see shapes, the dark masses of fir clusters, the pale expanse of tundra and rock, the black mirror of the lake. I turned my head slowly. The sleeping bag rustled against the tent floor. I looked through the mesh. It was crouching in the basin, maybe 30 yards away at the edge of the moonlight. The moonlight showed me more than I ever wanted to see. The shape was humanoid the way a scarecrow is humanoid. The right number of limbs in roughly the right places, but everything else subtly wrong. The torso was too long, the distance from hip to shoulder greater than it should be. The limbs bent as if broken or had extra joints or no joints at all. It was crouching on its haunches, arms braced against the ground, the arms bending in two places between shoulder and wrist. The surface glistened in moonlight, wet and slick. The skin, if it was skin, moved with slow peristaltic waves, like the contractions of a swallowing throat. As I watched, it began to change. The shoulders buckled inward with a wet crunch. Collarbones snapped and reformed. The spine curved into a new configuration. The rib cage collapsed and reshaped, ribs sliding over one another like fingers interlacing, compressing the torso into different proportions. I could see the bones beneath the surface, could see them sliding, clicking into new positions, a visceral puzzle being rearranged by impatient hands. The skull shifted visibly, forehead flattening, jaw extending, the whole structure of the head reforming while I watched. The sounds carried across the basin into still night air, wet cracks, disgusting pops, grinding bone on bone, thick gurgling that might have been breath. It was becoming something else. A deer, perhaps. I could see the legs thinning, the neck elongating, antlers budding from the skull. Or a person. The proportions kept shifting, oscillating between configurations, as though the thing couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Caught in transition, halfway between one form and another. The between state was worse than either endpoint could ever be. Antlers budded from the skull, then receded, absorbed back into bone. Hooves formed at the ends of limbs, then softened back into something like hands. The face stretched and contracted, features appearing and dissolving like images forming in smoke. Time seemed to lose function. The moon moved across the sky, or seemed to. I couldn't be sure of anything except the shape in the basin and the sounds it made, and my own heart beating too fast in my chest. At some point, the sounds stopped. The shape rose from its crouch and moved toward the tree line in a stuttering, lurching fashion, as though learning to use its new configuration, limbs swinging at wrong angles. It passed out of sight behind a fir cluster. I lay motionless, waiting for dawn. No sleeping, no moving, just watching the mesh panel and listening. The silence held. Not the total silence of April, but ordinary night silence, wind and insects, the small sounds of a living landscape. The sky began to lighten in the east. At first light, I packed my gear, left my tent standing, couldn't make myself stay long enough to break it down. I started down the trail toward the trailhead, moving fast, not quite running, my breathing too loud. I was 2 miles from the basin, descending through spruce forest below treeline, when I came around a bend and saw the deer. It was blocking the trail, facing me. A mule deer doe, or what appeared to be one. The size was correct, the coloring was right. Big ears, black-tipped tail, white rump patch. It was motionless, watching me approach. Something about its posture made my stomach clench. Its head was on backward. The body faced away from me down the trail, hindquarters and tail oriented in my direction, but the head had been rotated 180 degrees on the neck, so the face looked back over the spine, chin above the shoulders, ears pointing toward the tail. The rotation was complete and total. The neck was stretched and distorted by the force of rotation. The spine bulged visibly beneath hide, vertebrae pushed out of alignment by the force of rotation. And it was breathing. I could see the ribs moving, that steady expansion and contraction. Could see the nostrils flare. Its eyes were fixed on me, too dark, irises nearly black instead of brown. too wet with a sheen that wasn't the sheen of a deer's eye. The pupils weren't horizontal slits, they were round like a human's. And they tracked my movement. Its mouth opened. The sound that emerged was not the sound of a deer, not human. Somewhere between the two, a strangled vocalization that rose and fell in patterns that resembled speech, cadence and rhythm and emphasis like words, but not speech. The lips and tongue, too large for a deer's mouth, too mobile, were moving, shaping themselves around syllables. What emerged was a garbled approximation of language, a wet, slurring attempt at communication that failed and failed and failed. I went off the trail. My body moved on its own, crashing through underbrush, through deadfall, through willow thickets and patches of late snow, not caring about noise, not caring about anything except distance. Branches tore my face and arms. I fell twice, hard, catching myself on my hands, feeling the impact in wrists and elbows and knees. I got up and kept moving. I reached my truck around 10 in the morning, bleeding from a cut above my eye where a branch had caught me, left ankle swelling inside my boot where I'd turned it on a rock. I got in, locked the doors, started the engine, and drove. Didn't stop until I reached Bozeman, 70 miles away. I sat in a gas station parking lot for 20 minutes and cried. I filed a request for transfer to a desk position, citing mental health concerns related to pandemic stress and isolation. The request was denied. Pandemic staffing, they said, essential work, no replacements available. I was given 2 weeks of administrative leave and referred to an employee assistance counselor, a tired-sounding woman in Helena who I spoke with twice over the phone. I told her I was having trouble sleeping, which was true. Told her I was experiencing anxiety related to field work, which was also true. I didn't tell her why.
She didn't need to know about the silence, or the shape in the woods, or the backward-headed deer. I needed this job. I knew what would happen to my career if I sounded like that. The 2 weeks passed. I went back to work. I took only day assignments, tasks that could be completed in a single outing, routes I knew well, areas close to trailheads and roads. My supervisor didn't object. She could see something had happened to me, even if she didn't know what. I was losing weight, down 12 pounds since April, not sleeping well, waking at 2 or 3 and unable to fall back asleep, flinching at sudden sounds, checking my watch constantly, compulsively. In late August, a new technician was assigned to our district. Her name was Priya. She was 24, fresh from a master's program at Colorado State, eager and competent and entirely unafraid. She reminded me of myself at that age, before I knew what I now know. I was assigned to train her. We did day trips together for 2 weeks. I taught her equipment, protocols, routes, which trails were maintained and which weren't, which stream crossings were reliable, where bear activity was highest. She was a fast learner, asked practical questions. I liked her, which made everything worse, because I knew what I might have to tell her. In the 3rd week, my supervisor called me into her office. A critical monitoring station in a remote basin had malfunctioned and needed servicing before end of season. The basin was too far for a day trip, required an overnight stay. Priya would be accompanying me for training purposes. I tried to argue, suggested alternative assignments, couldn't explain what the risks were without sounding insane. My supervisor listened, then told me gently but firmly that there was no one else available and the work had to be done. I considered refusing, quitting on the spot, walking out and never coming back. But the consequences spread out before me like a map of a terrible country. No income, no insurance, no reference for future employment in the middle of a pandemic. And Priya would be assigned to someone else, someone who didn't know about the rule, who would take her into the backcountry without the knowledge that might save her life. We drove to the trailhead on a Thursday morning in late August. Weather was clear, sky pale blue, aspens on higher slopes starting to turn gold.
Priya was delighted. Talked about her graduate research, her family in Denver, a hiking trip she'd taken to Nepal the previous year. I listened and watched the forest scroll past through the truck window. We hiked 6 hours to reach the basin. The trail climbed through switchbacks to a high pass before dropping into the basin on the far side. The campsite was in a meadow near a small lake, ringed by spruce and fir, peaks rising above treeline in a jagged arc to the north. I'd been here before, years ago, with Earl. Remembered it as beautiful. It still was. Lake reflecting sky and trees and rocky peaks, a family of mergansers paddling near shore, ground squirrels chirping in rocks, meadowgrass thick and green, starred with late summer wildflowers. We set up our tents side by side at the meadow's edge, ate dinner as the sun went down, freeze-dried meals rehydrated with water from the lake. Priya asked about Earl. She'd read some of his old reports in the archives, admired his thoroughness. I told her stories, his wife's lemon bars, his reading glasses that he kept in his shirt pocket, always afraid of losing them, the retirement party where he cried and pretended he wasn't crying, made a joke about allergies no one believed. She liked that story. I didn't tell her about the rule. As light faded and the first stars appeared and the air grew cold, I tried. "There's something Earl used to say," I began. Priya looked at me across our small fire, face lit by flickering light, expression open and eager. I stopped, looked at her young face and dark eyes, and tried to find words that would make her understand without making me sound insane. How do you explain that silence is a warning when the warning means nothing if you don't know what you're being warned about? "He said to trust your instincts," I finished. "If something feels off, leave. Don't wait, don't rationalize, just leave." She smiled politely. "Good advice. I'll keep it in mind." We banked the fire and went to bed. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to night sounds. Water lapping on lake shore, occasional chirp of a late-season cricket. Somewhere distant, an owl hooted. I could hear Priya's breathing in the tent beside mine. Comforting sounds, safe sounds, the kinds of sounds I'd fallen asleep to hundreds of times. Eventually, I slept. When I woke, it was to darkness and silence. Complete darkness, the kind you only know when you're hundreds of miles from civilization, from any human light source. So dark that for a moment, panic rose in my chest. I searched through the tent mesh for stars. There they were, bright spill across the sky, more stars than most people see in their entire lives. Then I fully realized I could hear nothing. No water sounds, though the lake was 30 yards away. No insects, though crickets had been singing when I fell asleep. No wind in the trees. The silence was real and total. My watch face glowed when I lifted it. 1:38 a.m. "Priya?" I whispered. The darkness absorbed my word like I was speaking into a void. "Priya!" Louder this time. No response from the tent beside mine. Not a rustle, not a murmur. I pulled on my boots without lacing them and unzipped my tent as quietly as I could, crawled out into the meadow. Grass was wet with dew, cold against my hands. Stars gave enough light to see shapes. Dark mass of forest, pale expanse of meadow, silver gleam of lake. The mergansers were gone. Nothing moved on the water. Priya's tent was dark, the rainfly unzipped, inner door hanging open, mesh panel pushed aside. I crossed to it and looked inside. Her sleeping bag was pushed to one side, bunched against the tent wall. Her boots were gone. Her headlamp was gone, but the tent smelled of her deodorant and shampoo. She was not there. "Priya!" I called out loud. My voice died a few feet from my mouth, swallowed by that terrible silence. I looked at my watch. 1:41. 3 minutes since I'd woken. 7 minutes remained. I should have packed and left, should have followed Earl's rule. But I couldn't leave her. Couldn't be the person who saved himself and let a 24-year-old woman face this thing alone. She wouldn't even know what was coming. I got my headlamp from my tent and turned it on, walked toward the tree line. Priya!" The forest swallowed it. I walked along the meadow's edge, sweeping the headlamp across trees. The beam showed trunks and branches and undergrowth, all motionless. I called her name again and again. Then I heard her voice. It came from the darkness to my left, from somewhere deep in the trees, maybe 50 yards away. "Hey!" Cheerful, unconcerned. "Over here! I found something. You should come see." I turned toward the sound, headlamp probing darkness between trees. I saw nothing but trunks and shadows. Her voice came again, from my right this time, the exact opposite direction, from somewhere on the other side of the meadow. "Where are you going?" Different tone now, confused, a little hurt. "Wait! Please don't leave me out here. I twisted my ankle. I need help." Two voices, two directions, both voices hers. I stood in the meadow with silence bearing down on me like something physical. Beneath the voices, both still calling, overlapping now, one cheerful, one pleading, I heard another sound. Wet noise, rhythmic, like a heartbeat, like breathing, like something large drawing air through a throat full of fluid. It came from the trees ahead of me, from the direction of the lake. Getting closer. My watch read 1:47. 1 minute left. I ran back to my tent, didn't grab gear, only grabbed keys and wallet from the mesh pocket inside the tent flap. Started sprinting toward the trail. Footsteps followed in the trees. I could hear them clearly in the silence, crunching through undergrowth, keeping pace. The rhythm was off. Too many impacts per stride. Whatever it was had more than two legs. I didn't look, kept my headlamp pointed at the trail, one foot in front of the other. "Please," said Priya's voice from the trees to my left. "I'm hurt. I need help." I ignored it, didn't look, kept running. "Why won't you help me?" Different again. Still her voice, still recognizably Priya, but something underneath now, something that buzzed and clicked like an insect rubbing its legs together. "I thought we were friends. I thought you were going to train me. I thought you liked me." The voice kept calling, kept changing, pleading, then angry, then sobbing, then back to cheerful, cycling through emotions like someone flipping channels, looking for the one that would make me stop. After perhaps an hour, I came around a bend and my headlamp illuminated a figure blocking the trail. Priya, or wearing Priya's shape. It stood in the middle of the trail in Priya's hiking clothes, the green fleece she'd worn at dinner, gray pants with zipper pockets, dark hair pulled back into Priya's ponytail. It smiled at me with Priya's mouth. "There you are," it said, and the voice was perfect, exactly right. Every tone and cadence I'd heard over the past 2 weeks. "I've been looking for you everywhere. I woke up and you were gone. I got worried." I stopped. The shape was too convincing, the voice too accurate. For one terrible moment, I wondered if I'd been mistaken about everything. Then it raised one arm to wave, a friendly gesture, a greeting. The arm bent in the wrong direction at the elbow. It saw that I saw, looked at its arm, then back to me. "Well, would you look at that?" The smile stretched wider, pulling the cheeks taut. Too many teeth. Behind me, from the darkness I'd just walked through, I heard Priya's voice again. "Wait, please don't leave me." The thing in front of me cocked its head. The motion was too fast, head snapping to the side and holding there like a bird sighting prey. The smile remained fixed. I ran off the trail, into the trees, around the shape that wore Priya's face. I heard it turn to follow, heard the footsteps resume. Too many footsteps, crunching through undergrowth behind me, from the trees to my left, from somewhere ahead I hadn't yet reached. Asking me to wait, asking me to help, asking why I was leaving, what I was afraid of. I kept going until my legs burned and my lungs ached. The sky began to lighten in the east. The voices faded one by one. The footsteps stopped. Silence was replaced with birdsong and insect sounds and the ordinary ambient noise of a forest at dawn. I made it to the trailhead at 8:15 a.m. My truck was where I'd left it, dusty with pollen, undisturbed. I got in, locked the doors, started the engine. Drove to Bozeman without stopping, without looking in the rearview mirror. Search and rescue found Priya 11 days later. I wasn't part of the search. I was on administrative leave, pending investigation into why I'd returned alone, why I hadn't reported Priya missing for nearly 12 hours after reaching my truck. The investigation was thorough, but ultimately sympathetic. Concluded I'd experienced a psychological episode brought on by cumulative stress and isolation. The pandemic, the death of my mentor, months of working alone in conditions that would strain anyone's mental health. Concluded I'd left the campsite in a dissociative state, that I hadn't been responsible for Priya's decision to leave her tent in the night, that I hadn't been responsible for what happened to her. Official cause of death: animal attack. The report noted remains were scattered over a quarter mile. Noted the total mass of recovered remains was significantly less than expected for an adult human female. Certain parts were missing entirely. The pieces didn't quite add up to a complete person. It didn't say what might have happened to the rest of her. I resigned from the Forest Service in October 2020, sold my car and most of my possessions, bought a one-way ticket to Chicago, where a cousin offered her spare room. I moved into an apartment on the 14th floor of a building in Lakeview, a concrete box with a view of other concrete boxes and a strip of Lake Michigan in the distance. I work from home now, remote data analysis for an environmental consulting firm, work that can be done anywhere with an internet connection. I'll never be required to leave the city again. I still wonder how Earl learned about the rule. Who told him? Who was the first person to understand that when the animals go silent, you only have 10 minutes? I wonder if Earl knew what came after the 10 minutes, if he'd ever seen it, if he'd ever left someone behind. The thing I can't stop thinking about is this: Earl gave me the rule, gave it to me specifically during routine work without prompting, like he'd been waiting for the right moment, like he knew I'd need it, like he knew what was out there, waiting in the places where the silence falls. And he gave me exactly 10 minutes to get clear. Not 9, not 11, 10. Which means someone, somewhere, sometime stood in that silence and measured how long it took. Stood there and counted the minutes until something emerged from the trees. Someone survived long enough to count. And then they told someone else. And that knowledge passed down through decades of Forest Service employees, whispered in training sessions and over conference tables, disguised as folklore so it wouldn't sound like madness. Earl told me. I should have told Priya. I had 2 weeks, 2 full weeks to find the words, to make her understand. And I failed. Sometimes, late at night in my 14th floor apartment, I hear her voice. Cheerful at first, then confused, then pleading, asking why I left her, asking what I was afraid of. And I know it's not real, no, it's just memory and guilt and the particular torture of surviving when someone else didn't. But sometimes I wonder if the thing in the woods learned her voice well enough that it doesn't need her body anymore. If it carries her voice with it now, adding it to the collection, waiting for the next person who doesn't know the rule, waiting for the next silence to fall, waiting for someone to stay just a little too long. 10 minutes. That's all you have. Earl knew. Now, I know. And if you ever find yourself in wilderness where the animals go silent, where the birds stop calling and the insects stop moving, and the soundscape empties like water draining from a sink, you know, too. You have 10 minutes to get clear. Not to investigate, not to wait and see, not to convince yourself there's a rational explanation. 10 minutes to leave. After that, the odds aren't good. Earl said that 6 years ago, and I didn't believe him. Marcus Weber didn't know. Priya didn't know. They had no idea they were in the 10-minute window when the silence came, and by the time they understood something was wrong, their time had already run out. The window had closed, and something that wears bodies like clothing had all the time in the world.